Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new around here, I'm Seb, and if you've been watching the channel for any length of time now, you know that I'm all about mobile phone photography. And for the last 6 months, I've been rocking the Sony Xperia 1 Mark V as my daily driver. And even though it's not perfect, I absolutely love the integration between the hardware and the software. But not long ago, Xiaomi released something that really caught my eye, the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. So I went out and bought it to put it through its paces and to compare it to the Xperia's cameras. Now, I've been debating on how to make this video. See, Xiaomi released a photography kit alongside this phone, but unlike every single review that I've seen out there, I was very underwhelmed. And I mean very underwhelmed by it, because it has some major flaws and oversights. So I thought I'd take a look at the phone as a separate product rather than as a kit. Otherwise it would paint Xiaomi in a very bad light, and it definitely wouldn't be fair. So if you're interested in finding out what my concerns are about that photography kit, that video is already live as I published it alongside this one. So going back to the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, I'll have a few reviews coming soon, so stay tuned for that. But for now, I thought I'd put both of these phones head to head and see which one deserves the best camera phone crown. But before we jump into this raw comparison, I just want to do a quick roundup of the camera specs of each phone. So the Sony has 3 sensors, an f2.2 16mm 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 12 megapixel 85mm to 125mm continuous zoom telephoto, and a 52 megapixel f1.9 24mm main sensor pinned down to a 12 megapixel. Now on Xiaomi's side, the star of the show here has to be the main camera module, with stepless aperture that allows you to change it from f1.63 all the way to f4. It also boasts Sony's latest 1-inch 50 megapixel sensor, the Lightia LYT900, which also promises dual native ISO. The rest of the camera modules are more traditional here. We have a 50 megapixel f1.8 ultra wide lens, and not one, but 2 telephoto lenses. The first one is a 50 megapixel with a bright f1.8 75mm, and the second one is a 50 megapixel f2.5 120mm lens. It's also worth noting that all 4 camera modules can shoot at the full 50 megapixel, essentially bypassing the pixel binning process. But only the main 1-inch sensor is able to shoot in both RAW and 50 megapixel at the same time. The other modules will revert back to JPEG when activating the 50 megapixel mode. Right, now that we've got the boring bits out of the way, let's see how these two monsters stack up against each other. I went out with both phones and I've tried to get photos in various tricky scenarios to find their limits, but bear in mind that all these shots were straight out camera shots, not edited in any way, so you guys can see what you get straight out of the box. So for this comparison, I went out in Norwich and I took a series of photos. So do bear in mind that I do not own one of those fancy tripods, you know, where you can stack up various amount of devices. So all the photos you will see were taken probably a few seconds apart, but I mean, location wise, it was exactly the same, but that would explain sometimes maybe a slight variance in lighting. Also, thing to note, you can see the file size is completely different. So on the Xperia, we've got 3.8 megs, and on the Xiaomi, we've got nearly 10 megabytes. Meaning that the Xperia compresses the photos a lot more than Xiaomi does. So that will explain the results that we will see. So at 30%, we can't really notice much difference. So both these pictures were taken on the main camera, the 24mm on the Xperia and 23mm on the Xiaomi. So in terms of optics, there's not much of a difference there in terms of focal length. In terms of color, we can see that the processing here on the Xiaomi is might be a little bit more saturated compared to the Xperia. And the white balance also seems to be slightly warmer on the Xiaomi than it is on the Xperia. But if we start zooming in, and I will adjust accordingly, so if we go down to 150%, that's where we're going to start seeing quite a bit of difference, especially in the graphs. You can see that all the details is lost on the Xperia, whilst on the Xiaomi, a lot of detail is retained. Now we can see, even though those two were taken on the main camera sensor, where the 1-inch sensor really takes the crown here, where here in the tree trunks you can see all the little crevices and little plants here. you can really see a lot of detail. Now on the left hand side, if you look at the Xperia, you can see a lot of details are kind of blurred out and it's starting getting a little bit mushy. Same in terms of the grass here and on the sign where it starts getting a bit pixelated. And if we go back a bit as well and we start zooming in on the church down, well, the cathedral actually, people will get offended if I call that a church. The first thing here that's obvious in the sky is the amount of grain, the amount of noise compared to the Xiaomi, which remains extremely composed and still very smooth. Again, it's all processed here because we're in JPEG automatic mode, but it's really interesting to see how much of detail is still present whilst compared to the Xperia. So now moving on to the telephoto lenses, again, the Xperia on the left and the Xiaomi on the right, that is where we're really going to start seeing a big divide between the two. Now, when we start zooming in, bearing in mind that's only 50% zoom here, we can tell straight away where the Xperia is struggling. If you look at the foliage here and compare it to the Xiaomi, you can tell it's kind of already starting to fall apart quite big time. And it's always been one of my complaints with the telephoto on the Xperia, where it's okay at close range, but if you try to capture any sort of detail with the telephoto at long range, that's where it starts falling apart very quickly. So if we start zooming in even further, and we'll go to 100, and there you go, 150, and there we go to make it easier to see. Again, now is really obvious the problem that the Xperia has got with that telephoto. All the foliage is completely turned into mush, just a big mush of pixels, whilst on the Xiaomi is still extremely detailed. And if we look at the cathedral as well, very washed out here and plenty of detail still on the Xiaomi. Again, like on the main sensor, when we resort to the JPEG mode, the basic mode, you can see all that noise in the sky here, and that's just not there on the Xiaomi. Now the final nail in the coffin for the Xperia is when you switch to the second telephoto lens. So 125mm on the left and 120mm on the right. And as you can see, if we start zooming in now, it's really bad on the Xperia. And again, extremely good on the Xiaomi. Look, I mean, excuse the pun here, but there's no photo. Look at the foliage, look at the detail on the cathedral here. You can barely make out any detail here, and again, the noise. And I'm sure we're like really low ISO as well. We're ISO 32, ISO 50, and look at that noise here. That's always been my major complaint with the telephoto. It was just so grainy, so much noise, it's unreal. And even shooting in RAW, which we'll see later, doesn't give you a cleaner output. You still have to clean up that mess afterwards in post, and that's always been one of my major complaints. But again here, the Xiaomi does exceptionally well, and it really well. I can't praise it enough for its zoom lenses. Right, so in this scene now we can compare the ultra wide lenses. So again, Xperia on the left, Xiaomi on the right. And the first thing that jumps straight to the eye is the dynamic range. The Xiaomi here has managed to preserve all the highlights and all the shadows in this photo, whilst the Xperia is kind of blown out of the sky majorly in this photo. I mean, it's alright for the shadows, it's exposed the shadows properly, but by doing so, it's also blown out the sky. Also, what you'll probably notice is the focal length is a bit different between the two, and that's because the Xperia shoots at 16mm and the Xiaomi at 12mm. So the first thing that we will notice once we zoom in is how much distortion we've got between the two here. I mean, the Xperia has got a bit of distortion on the edges, but the Xiaomi has a lot more. But that is due to how much wider obviously the lens is, and you can kind of correct that in post anyway. But first thing that really jumped to my eyes when I used both ultra wide is, apart from the dynamic range, which is better on the Xiaomi, is just how soft the actual output is. If we switch to this side and we start zooming in, you can tell the Xperia has a lot more detail in it. and that's blatantly obvious between the two here. And as we'll see later, it's also a recurring story. So I think here Xiaomi needs to push out an update, maybe a software update on the phone to kind of improve the algorithm and to increase the amount of detail and to sort out the blurriness. We can also see that both phones exhibit a lot of fringing, so you can see it right here, and the Xperia actually fares worse in that case over here. Now, if I was to take these photos in RAW, I'd be able to add in some sharpening, which would catch up with the Xperia. But yeah, straight out of the box in basic auto mode, the Xperia fares better here in terms of detail. So same scene now, but we moved on to the main sensor. So 24mm Xperia on the left, 23mm Xiaomi on the right. And first thing that we can see is that the Xperia tried to overexpose this photo, and you can really tell if we start zooming in on the shadowed area here. So there we are. So you can tell noise has started to creep in as well. Again, we are quite low ISO, I believe. Yeah, ISO 40, ISO 64, so very low ISOs, and yet the Xperia is struggling even on that X Morty sensor, which made its way to the Xperia 6, by the way. But yeah, it's just the dynamic range doesn't seem great, and the detail is just kind of lost because of that noise. So again, here 6 megabytes for the JPEG, and on the Xiaomi 13 megabytes. So again, it's just a massive difference in terms of size and compression, and ultimately it shows on the output. And if we zoom in on this wall there, you can tell that the detail is just much better on the Xiaomi, a lot cleaner than it is on the Xperia here. Right, so in normal times, I know the Xperia 5, I know its limits. That's not a shot that I would take normally, because I'd know full well they would fail this one, so I would not even attempt it. But just for purely, you know, for comparison, again, Xiaomi on the right, Xperia on the left, and it's just complete, okay, let's say garbage, really. It's unusable. And it's not a case of not being steady or anything, because, you know, I was, and it's in auto mode, and it picked exactly the same values as what the Xiaomi would have. I didn't want to put it in manual and pick anything that would benefit one side better than the other, both in automatic, and that is what you came up with. So yeah, again, you can see much more detail here on the Xiaomi, and it's just completely lost here, and it's completely terrible on the Xperia side. So basic auto mode has never been Sony's strong point, as we know, but we can really start seeing a big divide in terms of dynamic range, sensor noise, and a massive gap in terms of quality when it comes to the telephoto lenses. Xiaomi wins this first round by quite a margin here. Now, I wanted to compare the macro modes of both phones. Now, we know the Xperia Mark 6 obviously has got a macro mode, which arguably is not particularly good, but anyway, the Mark 5, however, has not. So that was my attempt at trying to do a macro shot, and that's as close as I could get with getting focus on any of the lenses actually that could possibly get focus on the subject. So this is, believe it or not, this leaf here is what I could get on the Xiaomi. So here it's just a bit of a joke really, but I just wanted to do a comparison because at the end of the day, you know, the Xiaomi can do it. What can the Xperia Mark 5 do it? So we're now at 100%, and as you can tell, I mean, again, there's no photo here. Them little spikes here, that's what they are here. And that little bit of leaf here, that's what we can see here. And it's just a complete different beast altogether, and you can't compare the two. But as you know, I had to, because if I was gonna do the comparison on the Xperia Mark 5, I had to do it on the Xiaomi as well. And for good measure, I did a second one. And at first glance, you probably be thinking, it's that one on the left, the Xperia is all right actually. And that's a Xiaomi again on the right. But if we start zooming in again, I mean, there's a hell of a difference here. The amount of detail that you get is just absolutely unreal on the Xiaomi compared to here. If we start zooming in even further, that's it, it's just turned into a mush of pixels, unfortunately. But again, it's not surprising. We all knew that the Xperia Mark 5 wasn't, you know, a macro shooter in the first place. Right, there's no beating around the bush here. There's no other way to say this, but the Xperia sucks at macro shots. But that's fine because we kind of already knew that. But what is really impressive here is just how amazing the Xiaomi handles macro. I've never ever seen anything quite like it on the phone. Now, this is a category that personally I don't use myself, but a lot of people do, and I just wanted to see how they're fared against each other. So the first thing that I'll say is both phones have actually done a very good job here. And I know a lot of people have praised the Xperia 1 Mark V for its new updated 2.0 version of the portrait mode, which added a much better algorithm in doing the separation between the background and the foreground. And yes, it looks quite cinematic in that sense. But since then, and it's been what, a good 6-7 months now, well, about 6 months I'd say, since they've done the update, the competition's caught up. And now between the two, so again, Xperia on the left, Xiaomi on the right. And at first glance, you can see that the only difference that you can see here is the temperature. So a lot warmer on the left, a lot colder on the right. Again, it's preference. To be completely honest, I think it probably would go to the Sony ever so slightly. But again, it all depends because I didn't take them right at the same time. So it might have been a little bit cloudy at that time. Not too sure. But either way, they've done a really good job. Now, if we start zooming in, we can see where the Sony, and I specifically took this example because it wasn't an actual human, so I tried to trick the cameras in seeing how good they would do, and I was quite surprised they actually did a fairly good job overall. I mean, the Xperia kind of blurred parts that shouldn't have been blurred. If we look here, that should have been in focus here, and it is on the Xiaomi. And if we go down a little bit, this bit here should have been in focus as well, and it isn't. So yeah, the second thing that really jumped to my eye is the amount of detail, but not in a good way. This detail here is not actually things that were necessarily there in the first place though. Because when I took the photos, I went closer to the statue, and I think there's a lot of AI shadiness happening here. Because a lot of this extra detail that you see here wasn't actually there. So I'm not too sure what tricks the Xperia is putting here, but there's a bit of something dodgy going on. And yeah, we can see it all over here. You can see all that detail there wasn't actually there in the flesh. So I really don't know what's going on. But in terms of bokeh, you can tell they're pretty similar. You can see if we zoom in here, they've done a really good job, both of them. So overall, both these photos to me look really good, especially as it was a tricky subject to take a photo of. So they both get a point here. The Xperia's color rendition in portrait mode was more true to life than on the Xiaomi, and it did an okay job of separating the subject from the background, but it kept adding a very strong sharpening effect that almost added detail that wasn't there in the first place. The Xiaomi separation was more natural to me, and even though it looked softer, it probably was more representative to what my eyes could actually see. One interesting thing to note here is that you might not have to use the portrait mode as often with the Xiaomi due to its ability to produce a real natural bokeh thanks to its larger sensors. A few times I actually had to check if I wasn't in portrait mode, seeing how blurred the background was compared to the Xperia 1 Mark V. So now moving on to low light shots, again Xperia on the left and Xiaomi on the right. And this is the ultra wide lens, so 16mm on the left and 12mm on the right. And like I said earlier, we're going to see that recurring story happening here again. So in terms of dynamic range, we can see here the Xperia has blown out its highlights, whilst the Xiaomi preserved most of it. And if we start zooming in, the Xperia is a lot sharper than the Xiaomi. Again, just like we did see earlier. And if we zoom in a little bit further, we can see yet again the Xperia has failed at preserving any of the detail in the highlights here, whilst the Xiaomi did. And we can also see that the compression here is much worse than it is on the Xiaomi, with a lot more noise and a lot more artifacts here in the sky than there is on the Xiaomi. But again, I'll say it, there's more detail here in this aircon unit than there is on the right hand side. But overall, the dynamic range is much better on the Xiaomi than it is on the Xperia. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. At first glance, when I looked at this picture, when I took it, I thought, wow, hang on a minute, what's the problem here? Why is the Xperia so much sharper here than it is on the Xiaomi? I mean, it's quite obvious. But then I scrolled along and I looked, I was like, hang on a minute, no, there's more detail on the Xiaomi. Then I looked at the window over there and I thought, there really is a problem. But then I remembered, hang on, we're actually dealing with a 1-inch sensor. And that, in conjunction with the variable aperture, means that you get a much shallower depth of field. Meaning that when you're focused on an area, and both of these photos I did focus on the back of the photo, that would give you this, a sharper image where you actually focused, which makes sense. So again, if we start zooming, we can see where the Xperia, even though it's got that XMORT sensor, the dynamic range is just suffering so much. I mean, look at all the detail here that's been lost in the highlights, whilst on the Xiaomi, it's all there to be seen still. And if we zoom in on the sky, you can tell how much noise, grain there is here on the Xperia, whilst on the Xiaomi, it's much lower. It's more of a filmic grain than it is on the Xperia. And for good measure, if you really wanted to see the 125mm of the Xperia versus the 120mm on the Xiaomi, here you have it, and it's not pretty by any means. I mean, you can see even zoomed in at 175%, you can see there's a mesh in front of that brickwork here on by the window. You can see it on the window here. You can't see anything here at all, and again, all detail here is lost. And yes, you got a little bit of noise here, but I mean, this is past noise. This is just a mush of pixels. And when we zoom in on that sign again, the amount of detail you get on the Xiaomi is completely unreal compared to the Xperia. It's like night and day difference, literally. And I thought I'd take a second picture with actual subjects in them. And again, that's the third telephoto zoom, the 120mm on the left and 125mm on the left, 120 on the right. And yeah, same results here. I mean, all detail is completely lost on the Xperia, whilst all the texture of that lady's t-shirt there comes up on the screen. And I mean, it just carries on and on and on and on. Yeah, like I said earlier, I had such a hard time dealing with, not a hard time, but I had to do a lot of post-processing on my raw files in Lightroom with Denoise AI, as well as adding extra detail to be able to have some decent low light shots. And even by using a tripod, you'd still have the issue of the noise, which has always been my main issue with the main telephoto lens, the 125mm. It's been soft and noisy as hell. That's why most of the time I was hovering around the 85mm mark, and I can show you the 85mm actually, which is the one just before, which is a little bit more usable than the 125. But again, well, I mean, saying that, not really, but by using a bit of Denoise AI, I was still able to remove most of the noise and to have an okay shot. But I mean, with the Xiaomi here, it's just, yeah, night and day again.
When switching to night mode, one thing shows on all my testing. The shots are consistently sharper from edge to center on the Xperia 1 Mark V when using the ultra-wide lens. The Xiaomi is definitely softer here, especially on the edges. Unfortunately for the Xperia 1 Mark V, that's where it ends. The MEMS sensor gives similar results on both phones, but the Xiaomi has a much wider dynamic range with slightly less noise and a shallower depth of field. When switching to either telephoto lenses, the Xperia 1 Mark V get absolutely slaughtered on all counts. The Xiaomi, shot after shot, manages to be pretty noise-free, probably due to its native ISO, but more importantly, there's a ton of detail and clarity throughout the photos, where the Xperia 1 Mark V just ends up looking extremely grainy and mushy. It goes without saying that here the point goes to the Xiaomi.
Now let's jump to raw files. So these raw files are literally compared as is. There's literally no processing done to them because I just wanted to show you how they come out straight out of camera. One thing to note here, if you look at the zooming range, is different, and it's the same with all the DNG, all the raw files.
for both cameras, because for some reason this software doesn't register the zoom properly with the Xperia photos. I don't know why, but I mean the photos themselves, there's just nothing. I just had to zoom in a little bit more, but they're technically not more zoomed in, they're at the same level. Obviously bear in mind that the Xiaomi is a 12mm and the Xperia is a 16mm ultra wide. Now, having said that, the story continues. Like we said earlier, there's a trend. The ultra wide is sharper on the Xperia, but the dynamic range is all there to see. I mean, the Xiaomi has literally exposed everything as it should have been, whilst the Xperia didn't. It's overblown the highlights. So having said that, you could probably recover some of the highlights in this, probably not all of it to be fair, but you could probably recover a good amount in Lightroom. But again, if we start zooming in, that's where the Xiaomi, again, is just soft overall. And yes, I know the Xiaomi would have to be zoomed in a bit more, because punched in a bit more, because it's only a 12mm rather than a 16mm, so that also contributes to the fact that it's softer. But I think still Xiaomi could tweak it to be able to get a bit more sharpness out of the sensor. I mean, we're not talking terribly soft. I mean, if you look on the floor here, it's still kind of sharp, but it's just nowhere near as sharp as the Xperia. And when it comes to raw photos, the Xperia tends to make it more flat, and the Xiaomi tends to spit out some more vibrant colors. So I think if I was making the sensor and the software, I would have made like a kind of like a middle ground, if that makes sense. Because sometimes on the Xperia, you have to work that little bit much harder to get more oomph out of the photos, if that makes sense. And yeah, some will argue that it's more flat, more neutral, and it is, by any means it is, compared to the Xiaomi anyway. But you do have to work harder. Here, it would just be a case to kind of, dial down a bit of saturation a little bit. Now, moving on to the main sensor, again, we can see the dynamic range on the Xiaomi is much higher than it is on the Xperia. And again, here, I would have a very hard time trying to recover those highlights here. Again, these RAWs were shot in complete automatic mode. So it's raw but in automatic. Otherwise, I would have exposed for the highlights, which would have made everything darker, and I would have had to recover the shadows as opposed to the highlights, if that makes sense. Again, here on the left on the Xperia, we got more neutral, more flatter colors, which some might prefer. I don't mind being flat, because I just boost everything up, all the bits that I want to be boosted up, and I change the colors in post anyway. But the Xiaomi is a lot more saturated out of the box, as you can see. Now, we can see it starts getting a bit interesting if we start zooming in, as even though it's the main sensor, you can tell the 1" is getting a lot more detail in than the Xperia. If you look at the crown here, I mean, we're talking about, in real zoom in, we're actually 200. Disregard this one, because again, the software is not doing it properly for the DNG on the Xperia, but we're about 253% now zoomed in, and the amount of detail still is unreal compared to the Xperia here. I mean, just look at the ground, that extra detail that we get here in the pavement, or if we zoom in on these leaves here, you can see the tree bark, and you can see the leaves. It's just much more detailed overall. So if you were asking yourself whether the Xperia would redeem itself in the telephoto module in RAW against the Xiaomi, well, you've got your answer here. It does not. The amount of detail still that you get on the Xiaomi is just unbelievable compared to the Xperia. I mean, it's all over. It's just, I don't know, it's crazy. I'm absolutely in love with the telephoto on the Xiaomi. One thing to also note with the Xiaomi is just how consistent it is with its colors across all the different focal lengths. When the Xperia, when you start zooming it, when you start using the telephotos, it starts kind of getting that faded look, like almost if you had like a filter or a preset already applied to the photo. It's kind of you get like green tints already and a fade in the shadows. Literally, it looks like, you know, if it's already been graded in some sense. Now for the final round of raw files, I wanted to do some low lights and see how they fare against each other. And well, with the ultra wide, here we go again, same story. We've got a lot of noise here on the Xperia, and the Xiaomi is just a lot softer than the Xperia once again. Now, when we move on to the main camera, the main sensor, we can really tell where the 1-inch excels and is at low light. I mean, the amount of noise is so much more controlled than the Xperia, and also the amount of detail that comes out is just unreal compared to it. And I mean, look at that, look at the difference between the two. It's just night and day, excuse the pun, but yeah. Again, that sign here, you can see that the amount of detail that there is in this part is just unbelievably good for a phone. So yeah, once again, the story repeats itself. Better dynamic range, much more controlled noise, more detail. So overall, the 1-inch, unsurprisingly, wins this round. And if we must, here comes the telephoto raw on the Xperia and the Xiaomi. And I don't think I need to say anything really. The photos just, again, speak for themselves. Here you really can't defend the Xperia. I mean, a lawyer would have a really hard time trying to save that picture compared to this one, really. And again, even from what I've seen from the 1 Mark 6, and even though it's got an extended range to 170mm, it's just a recurrent story. It's very soft and it's noisy, and it's entirely due to the sensor. Sony needs to address the problem and change the sensors. I mean, I wouldn't mind, but they make the same sensor that go on the Xiaomi. So why can't they use them on their own cameras?
In RAW mode, the same story continues. Sharper ultra-wide shots on the Xperia 1 Mark 5, but on the Xiaomi, much wider dynamic range on every lens and a much more controlled noise levels throughout, with a day and night difference in terms of detail and clarity overall. So the point, once again, goes to the Xiaomi here. I couldn't finish this comparison without talking about the last category, the software. The overall experience with the Xperia, is next to perfect. The Photo Pro app, when in manual mode, is as close as it gets to holding an actual camera. Sure, it got a lot of people talking, saying how complex it all is to the average person, but to me and us photo enthusiasts in general, it's just how any camera app should be. It's organized, accessible, and it just works. I mean, they've had years to refine it. On the other hand though, the Xiaomi's camera app feels like a free-for-all. It's all over the place. It's all crammed together. The UI is hard to read with its transparent overlays. It just feels clunky and it just takes away from the overall experience. And that's the reason camera manufacturers push so much effort into their UI, because when you're put in a situation where you have to quickly change settings, it's the difference between getting the shot or missing it altogether. Xiaomi seems to be promoting their latest products to the camera phone enthusiast by enticing them with a photographer kit, dual native ISO, variable aperture and all that, but in the process they forgot the most important thing, the UI. I really hope they improve on it in future updates and take notes from the competition's design language. I'm sure they'll get there, but for now it's frustrating, and in the meantime the end user has no choice but to get used to it. So yeah, Sony wins hands down in the software category, by a mere miles. So if we tally up the scores, it's fairly easy to see who the winner is here. Don't get me wrong though, I'm not saying the Xperia 1 Mark 5 is bad by any means. Again, if you've been watching the channel, you'll know what this beast is capable of. And on top of that, it can be found for less than £600 on eBay now, which really makes it a steal. Would I recommend it to anyone in 2024? Absolutely, 1,000,000%. But look guys, like I always say, it's not about the phone that you have, but what you do with it. And this is what this channel is all about. Making the most out of whatever device you have. It doesn't have to be a Xiaomi or a Sony, but for me as a content creator, having new gear to experiment with and to play with keeps me going, it keeps me excited, and that's why the Xiaomi is now going to be my new daily driver. Right, I really hope that you guys enjoyed this comparison. Do let me know down in the comments what you guys think about the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, and I look forward to bringing you even more content within this new phone. But that's about all for this video, so thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you have already done so. Take care, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!